we have a session right now on the state of the North East's cyber defences. It was originally publicised as insights from 1,000 local firms. We've actually done nearly 2,000, which I'll come on to exactly the reason why shortly. But yeah, very excited to take you through this information. So the obligatory introduction to the company. If you've never heard of Atlas Cloud before, we've been going about 12 years. We've pretty much always focused on, quote, helping people do great work from anywhere. And as you're probably well aware, over the course of the pandemic, that got a term basically, and it's called hybrid working. So we've focused on technology for that long before hybrid was a word. So we offer IT managed services, and through the course of the pandemic, we did a load of research because it was in our space and we wanted to find out how people had adapted to this. Pleased to say we've had our research published quite widely, but we've really taken that on board as our way of working now, and we've built that into our solutions. And we've also recently just started doing that on cybersecurity services as well, which we've got a little sub-brand, Cyber by Atlas Cloud. So you might know us as an IT managed service provider, but now also a cybersecurity service. And what we're going to talk through today is some of the research that we found from cybersecurity. So two speakers today. One is me. I'm the person that does the lead on the research analysis of, I think, definitely past tens of thousands of users that we've done research on. And then there's my colleague James. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yep, sure. So just a quick introduction from me. I'm the Network and Security Manager here at Atlas Cloud. One of my primary roles is to develop our cybersecurity products. So after Ben, I'll be doing a quick talk about common ways malicious threat actors might compromise your business. Perfect.
Thanks, James. Now we can talk about the research. So I'll talk about the research and then James will do the implications. So before I go into the specifics of the research and the findings, I always like to talk about the methodology and what we're aiming to find and how we executed that sort of thing. So we wanted to, find a general state of the Northeast. So we chose to audit the Northeast Chamber of Commerce membership because it has companies large and small. So it's not like we're cherry picking the results or anything. It's just all of their members. We conducted it this month, and their membership database happened to be 1,974. So that's our sample size. But the general aim of the research is to find the state of cybersecurity competence across the Northeast by testing common attack exploits. So really what we're looking to find is how good is the Northeast at cybersecurity. So we obviously can't audit everything, especially when it's 1,947 organisations that we are auditing. There was a fair degree of automation in the process that we automated. So the common attack exploits, or the three areas that we looked for, was breach passwords, vulnerabilities to do with web servers, and also to do with your domain as well, which we'll talk through the specifics of those things. But those are the three broad categories that we looked to analyse. So first one, breach passwords. Specifically, what is this? It's usernames and passwords stolen and made available to criminals over the dark web. So this is, employee username and passwords to get into your corporate systems. The implication of this is it means attackers can gain access to your corporate systems. They can and that could potentially be undetected as well. You wouldn't know that they'd been able to gain access because it would just be like a normal user logging in. So I'll just pause there and ask you to think for a second, what proportion of Northeast businesses do you think have had breach passwords made available, or are available on the dark web right now as of this month? Well, the actual answer is 87% of the 1,947 organisations that we audited did have at least one stolen username or password available over the internet, which is quite shocking, really. There's not a huge amount you can do to stop it from happening, but there's a lot you can do to react to it in the right way and minimise the risk of it happening, which James will touch upon some aspects of that. But I'll go into more of the details of the statistics. So, staying on the subject of breach passwords, we also looked at how many passwords are available per firm, and you can see the graph of how that's split there. So the averages varied massively because there's some very large multinationals in the Northeast Chamber of Commerce database that have an office in the Northeast, and that pushed the average up quite significantly to 923. But the median, which is probably a better average in this case, is 8. So, you know, that's how I would take as the average. But the point here is that the more passwords are available, the greater an attacker's chance of success, because they can keep trying different ones to gain access. So obviously, the higher the number, the worse it is, and that's a very bad thing. So you can see there's lots of companies there with lots of passwords, and that's quite a significant risk if you don't do anything about it. Moving away from the stolen passwords, we looked at web servers and particular vulnerabilities there. So this is, you know, the things that you store your websites on, or it could be you store some data on it. You know, it's a physical tin that you may or may not manage, but is related to your company or domain. And you know, if attackers, if it's unprotected, it can be compromised by attackers, and if it's compromised, it means that they can take down your website, or they can steal anything that it hosts. So, for example, if you think about a recruitment firm, a website may or may not process CVs because they're encouraging people to apply for jobs. That's something that an attacker could get access to. If it's e-commerce, they could get access to credit card information, or they could just stop your company from appearing like it exists, and they could hold that to ransom until you pay them a bunch of money. So, you know, potentially very serious consequences for a whole range of firms. And quite shockingly, we found a lot of issues with web servers. 88% of the companies that we audited requires improvement, and only 12% had web servers that were up to date, basically. And a lot of these things are very easily fixed. It's things like updating your content management system, WordPress being the most popular one, the thing that the website's hosted on. It could be a whole bunch of other things, but you know, they're very easily ticked off. So you know, the Northeast needs to pull its finger out there. Domain vulnerabilities. So this it's very similar to the web server, but the domain is the bits used in the URL, but it's also used in your email system, for example, and it's used in a few other instances as well. So we looked. I mean, there are many things that you can look for in a domain, and we decided to create our own categories of high, medium, and low. And as mentioned, there was a degree of automation in our auditing where we just had to put some assumptions in place to be able to categorize the high, medium, and low. If we were to do a full audit for an organization, we would probably categorize those things much more effectively than what we did here, but it definitely gives you a good idea of the potential risks involved. And again, it's similar implications. If attackers can compromise your domain. They can do things with your corporate website or even your email systems, and they can still hold you to ransom. But the exposure by severity here, weirdly, is very evenly spread between low, medium, and high. But what that means is we found a third of the database, a third of the companies in the Northeast have a high severity of their exposure to do with their domain. Another third, medium, and then the final third is low. But that doesn't mean that there isn't significant risks in there. It's just what our automated checks found. So again, there's a huge scope for improvement there, and there's a lot of companies at risk. Very interestingly and very importantly, no organization had 0 things that came up. They range from 1 to, in one case, 65,000, which is phenomenal amounts of things that need to be fixed. You know, it's all to do with risk, and some of these things are very easily minimized and boxed off. But one specific aspect of domain to do with brand protection is a security standard called DMARC in the industry, and what that means is once you enable the protection here, it basically stops attackers being able to hijack your domain and be able to use that to send emails, which is, if you think about the implications of that, is really, really significant, because an attacker could send an email that appears exactly from your company or an employee of your company. So if you layer that with a little bit of social engineering and you happen to find out that a certain company does business with another company or banks with another company, you can send an email, you can hijack the domain, send an email and say, this invoice is unpaid, please pay here, here's the details. And, you know, sometimes that happens and people pay the invoices without thinking about it, and lots of money is lost. So it's a really simple change that can have quite a significant impact on minimizing your risk. And we found that 78% of the Northeast firms don't have DMARC enabled, and only 22% do. So it's a small process that you go through. In terms of enabling it, you just have to make sure that there's no business disruption when you're stopping things to do with your emails. So we don't know whether some organizations are going through the process, because it takes a few months to work that out with some tools that make that process very simple. But we don't know how many people are going through the process of enabling this, but we can tell you that only 22% have it enabled, which is quite shocking. It's a standard that's been around for many years now. It should be much better adopted given the severity of the threats here. And the reminder there is applying DMARC authentication prevents this form of fraud altogether. So if we were to look at the findings here and think back of our original aim of the research, how has the Northeast fared? Not particularly well. Let's try harder. F, here's what I've got on the screen. There's a couple of statistics that I found from official UK statistics from Department of Digital that I've got here that sort of go well with the findings that we've had today. So 54% of UK businesses have acted in the past 12 months to identify cybersecurity risks, which is brilliant. However, what we found that from the companies in the Northeast is, you know, in some instances, 70–80% of organisations have very significant risks that are quite easily fixed. So, you know, there's a suggestion there that the Northeast needs to play catch up a little bit, because across the UK, it's 54% of people that are acting upon it within the last 12 months. And these are the, you know, most easiest to find cybersecurity insights, really. And just the reminder there of the threat in general in the last 12 months. Again, official UK statistics, 39% of UK businesses did identify a cyber attack. So there's a very real threat there, and we need to get better. So at this point, I will hand over to James.
Right, afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to share my presentation. Right, Ben, if you can just confirm that everyone can see the presentation.
Yeah, it's all good.
Brilliant. So mine's going to be a little bit different to Ben's. I'm going to be talking about the types of vulnerabilities there are, kind of some of the most common ways that a threat actor might attempt to compromise your business. So as with every cybersecurity presentation, one of my main goals is to scare you as much as possible. So let's start off with some facts. The first is that 60% of small companies close within 6 months of being hacked. That's a lot of companies. Since 2020, cyber attacks globally have increased by 300%. So as you can see, based on that alone, malicious threat actors are ramping up their attacks, and we should be more conscious than ever about cybersecurity. 12.4 million devices were infected by malware in 2009. Going on 9 years, this has now surpassed 800 million. And threat actors who are using malware are getting more and more sophisticated in their ways that they're avoiding traditional antiviruses, which is why we're now implementing things like EDR to go away from a signature-based threat detection to more of an AI-based, where we're looking at certain types of behaviors. And the last statistic is 4 out of 10 businesses have reported breaches in the last 12 months alone. So these facts in and of themselves should tell us that we really need to start thinking about security and looking at the most common ways that criminals get hold of our data. The first, as Ben has already gone over, are breach passwords. So if you look on the right, you're going to see the 9 top passwords that are currently used. Now, I mean, my first advice is don't use those. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. Password is not a good password. Neither is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So one of the first things we need to do is look to create strong passwords. Many people might think that, okay, I've had my password breached, you know, some criminals have my password, but that's fine because I update my mailbox password all the time. Every month I'm updating my 365 password. I'm not worried. But the problem we have is many employees, and sometimes without permission, sign up to third-party services. Now, these third-party services don't have the same security policies as your company might have. So you might be signing up to a website with your employee email and using your employer's credit card information, or you're putting some of your customers' information on these third-party services, and they get hacked because they don't have patch policies in place. They're not protecting your data. So when we look at breach passwords, we have to go beyond our mailboxes and we have to look at the statistics as a whole. So as you can see, as many as 555 million stolen passwords are on the dark web since 2017 alone. And I know that is much higher now. Probably the most common way that criminals will actually gain access to your organization is through phishing attacks. I'm sure many people have heard of these. If you look at the graph on the right, the implementation of phishing sites by criminals is going up year on year. If we look at the statistics, phishing is the most commonly identified cyber attack. Among the 39% identifying any breaches or attacks, 83% had phishing attacks. So we can see the vast majority of these attacks are spurred on by phishing attacks. And what kind of things are we looking at here? Infected attachments. You might have somebody receive a CV. So please read my CV. I'm really interested in a job. But we're not checking these attachments. They could have malicious code running from those. We could have malicious URLs as showing in the graph here. You know, I'm sure many of you have had emails saying, oh, you've got posts coming, you know, could you please check this tracking link? When we're not really expecting any mail, but people who aren't educated will click on these links out of curiosity, not realizing that they could be compromising a company asset, and as a result, having information stolen. Website security. Ben's already covered content management systems to a degree. Looking at the facts, 30,000 new websites are hacked every day. Now, if you put this into perspective, you need to understand that your public-facing site is your reputation. Customers go on that website to see what services you offer. They may also use services that require payment information. There may be some confidential data stored in the back end. So if you're not updating your website security, you could have a multitude of problems. Just looking at the 3 top-rated ways that somebody might access your website. The first is cross-site scripting. Then we have SQL injection and vulnerable content management systems. Denial of service. So for anybody that doesn't know what denial of service is, looking at the definition above, a denial of service attack is a malicious attempt to overwhelm an online service and render it unusable. So you can imagine something used day to day. It could be YouTube as an example. If someone did a distributed denial of service attack on the website and succeeded, you would lose access to that service. Now, putting that into your own perspective as a business, if you have a critical service that your customers need to use in order for you to make profitability, you need to consider having some form of protection. In Q4 2021 alone, there was a 75% jump compared to the previous 3 months. And on average, every hour, between £16,000 and £33,000 is lost. And that's quite a lot of money for anybody. Low-hanging fruit. So the way we would define this is, if I was a criminal, what are the things I'm going to look for? What are the easy targets? Content management systems, so WordPress, Joomla, Drupal, any of these systems that you're using, they have a multitude of plugins that are involved in these. And if they're not patched and updated, you could actually have a very critical vulnerability that could lead to somebody compromising your website. They could deface your website, steal information, or just take it down altogether. So we have to look to protecting these assets. Open and outdated services. You might have a really old Windows server, think Windows SBS, that's sitting there exposed to the web. You don't have any patch policy against this because you're not using it, you're not thinking about it. But ultimately, if someone gains access to one of these assets, they may be able to pivot, i.e. go from this server to something more critical in your infrastructure and cause problems. And of course, weak password policies with no MFA. We'll touch upon that a bit more later. So how can we prevent each of these? In regards to phishing attacks, we need to protect our mailboxes. One of the most common ways to do that is to utilize mail security services. One that comes to mind is Mimecast. This will intercept the mail before it reaches the mailbox and look for common threat actors. That way, you're bypassing the need, even though you should still do user training, you're somewhat bypassing the need to do user training on such a continuous basis. As well as that, as Ben mentioned, implement DMARC, very important, and perform awareness training. At the end of the day, human error is usually the most common cause in relation to companies being breached. So making sure that your users are trained and are aware of what a phishing attack is can prevent many, many attacks. Breached accounts. I can't state this enough. Implement 2FA. At the end of the day, if someone gets your password, if you have two-factor authentication enabled, for the majority of cases, they can't log into your mailbox or your service, because alongside that password, they're going to require a token that's on that person's phone. And that token regenerates every 60 seconds. So as a result, implementing 2FA is very, very important. Strong password policies. Don't use the word password for your password. Use 12 characters, use special characters, and avoid signing up to third-party sites when you don't need to. You shouldn't be using your company email to sign up to everything you want to use. That should only be used for corporate things like, I don't know, whatever services your company is using. And as well as that, we can monitor suspicious logins. If you're using Office 365, we can have somebody proactively check. There's a login going into this user's account and it's coming from China. Well, I know that my user is based in the UK. This is clearly suspicious. We can look for signs and stop these attacks from going further and potentially causing massive damage. Website security. Keep your website components updated. Very important. Don't expose confidential data. Don't put the email for every single employee on your website. Don't put phone numbers unless it's necessary. Follow best practices. Use strong encryption. Is your website using TLS? What version is it using? If you don't know what version it's using, maybe have it reviewed, because you don't want somebody performing a man-in-the-middle attack and stealing information from your site, as an example. And also consider denial of service protection services. As mentioned before, you don't want customers to lose access to your services. So using something like Cloudflare is a really good way forward. Just to sum up what Ben did, so we looked at 2,000 businesses based on the information from our automated tools. 87% of companies reviewed had breached emails and passwords. 88% of companies reviewed had security improvements. Again, that can mean CMS. It could be their TLS version. It could be something as simple as security headers, but it's always best to follow best practices. Nearly all companies reviewed had multiple externally facing assets, which in and of itself isn't a problem, but many of them showed critical issues. And of course, phishing analysis. Over half of companies reviewed had little to no phishing protection in place. And considering that phishing is one of the most prevalent ways that somebody accesses your business, we need to consider making sure that we have protection in place. So that's everything from me, and I hope I scared everybody suitably. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. So I think there is time now for any questions if they come through. I know Graham asked one in the chat, just what is endpoint, what is EDR, and I defined it as endpoint detection response. Don't know whether you want to elaborate on what exactly EDR does, James.
Yeah, sure. So traditionally, a traditional antivirus will look for signatures. So let's imagine there's a piece of malware out there that finds itself on your computer. That will match a particular signature according to the code it's compromised of. The problem here is that malicious attackers can actually do what's called obfuscation. They can manipulate that code so the signature changes. So traditional antivirus actually becomes useless when somebody does that. What something like EDR does is it looks at it based rather on the signature, which it will also do. It also looks at the behavior. So is that individual, is that tool that you ran, is that script that you ran, which you don't know whether it's safe, is it doing something that's nefarious? Is it giving someone access to your system? And it will look for those telltale signs and alert the user.
That's great, thanks, James.
And that answers it.
No other questions coming through yet. Give it a couple more minutes. Anyone got any questions about the research? Graham says, what's next? I don't know, you'd have to check the agenda. Oh, research-wise. So thanks for that, Graham. So we've been doing lots of cyber audits across different markets of the same ilk, basically, but also we do user research on IT effectiveness, basically, which is a service we run for customers, but also we do it in certain markets to find out the general state of. We've done it for the recruitment agency market, for example, and I think we plan to do that in a few more markets. But that's finding out the effectiveness of IT, where aspects are not so effective, and then we can start to think about ways to solve those problems. I think the things that came up around that sort of research is Teams isn't as effective as it could be, that sort of thing. That was the main thing. I can't remember anything else. But those are our two main focuses at the minute. And there's a load of research on our website about hybrid working. But I think we all need to work out how it works before we can learn a bit more. I think we need to put it more into implementation before we do another round of learning about hybrid working. Okay, well, there's no other questions, so I guess we'll leave it there, but thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.